The pounding on my apartment door at 5 in the morning felt like a sledgehammer against my skull. I stumbled through the darkness, my heart racing as the aggressive knocking continued without pause. When I yanked open the door, my cousin Derek stood there with 3 massive men behind him and a moving truck idling in the parking lot. He held official-looking papers in one hand and wore a smug expression that made my stomach drop. "Grandpa's giving me your apartment, Natasha. Start packing." The words hit me like ice water. This place represented everything I had fought to rebuild after escaping my abusive ex-boyfriend 2 years ago. I stared at Derek in complete disbelief as he pushed past me into my living room, his boots tracking mud across the carpet I had shampooed just last weekend. The 3 movers followed him inside, their eyes scanning my furniture, like vultures evaluating prey. My hands trembled as I reached for the documents Derek thrust toward me, the official letterhead of Baxter and Associates Legal Services swimming before my vision. "This has to be some kind of mistake," I whispered. But Derek's cold laughter cut through my denial like a knife. "No mistake, cousin. Grandpa Charles signed these papers 3 weeks ago, transferring full ownership of this apartment to me. He decided you've been wasting your potential living here alone instead of finding yourself a proper husband." Derek's voice dripped with satisfaction as he gestured around my carefully decorated space. "A man should have the prime family property, don't you think?" The legal document felt heavy in my shaking hands as I read the impossible words. Property transfer deed, grantor Charles Edward Morrison, grantee Derek Allen Thompson. My grandfather's signature sprawled across the bottom in his familiar blue ink, witnessed by 2 people I had never heard of. The date stamp showed it was filed just 72 hours ago. "But I've lived here for 6 years," I protested, my voice cracking. "I pay rent every month. I've never missed a payment. This apartment is my home." Derek shrugged with theatrical indifference. "Should have visited the old man more often instead of being so selfish. Should have shown proper respect to your elders. Grandpa told me all about how you barely call him anymore, how you're too busy with your little job to care about family." My mind reeled as I tried to process his words. I called Grandpa Charles every Sunday without fail and visited him twice a month at Sunset Manor. We had lunch together just 2 weeks ago and he seemed perfectly fine, asking about my work at Dr. Peterson's dental practice and whether I was dating anyone special. With trembling fingers, I dialed Grandpa's number at the assisted living facility. The phone rang 4 times before his familiar voice answered, though it sounded smaller than usual, more fragile. "Grandpa, it's Natasha. Derek is here saying you gave him my apartment. Please tell me this is all some horrible misunderstanding." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Grandpa finally spoke, his words felt like physical blows. "Derek is a good boy, Natasha. He needs a fresh start after his divorce. You're young and strong. You can figure something else out." "But Grandpa, this is my home. You know how hard I worked to get back on my feet after leaving Brad. You know what this place means to me." Derek explained everything to me, sweetheart. How you've been living irresponsibly, staying out all hours, bringing strange men around. A young lady should be settling down, not gallivanting around like some wild thing. The accusations hit me like slaps across the face. I worked 50 hours a week at the dental office, came home exhausted every evening, and my idea of wild nightlife was watching Netflix with a cup of herbal tea. I hadn't been on a date in 8 months because I was still rebuilding my confidence after Brad's psychological torture. "Grandpa, that's not true. Derek is lying to you. I live quietly here. I work hard and save my money. Please, you have to believe me." But the line had already gone dead. Derek smirked as I stared at my phone in shock. 72 hours, Natasha. That's what the law gives you to vacate. I'm moving in this weekend with my girlfriend Crystal, and we don't want any of your drama cluttering up our fresh start. I looked around my apartment with new eyes, seeing it as Derek must see it. The overstuffed bookshelves filled with romance novels and self-help titles, the collection of succulent plants lined up on the windowsill, the framed photographs of me and my college friends smiling and carefree before life taught me about the brutality some people could inflict on those who love them. My savings account held exactly $843, barely enough for groceries for the next month, let alone a security deposit on a new apartment. The rental market in our area had exploded in the past 2 years, with even studio apartments requiring first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit that could total $3,000 or more. "This can't be legal," I said desperately. "There have to be procedures, waiting periods, notifications." Derek pulled out his phone and showed me photos of himself and Crystal standing in what looked like a furniture showroom, pointing at bedroom sets and kitchen tables. "Already picked out all new stuff. Can't wait to get rid of all this girly nonsense you've got cluttered around here." The movers had begun wrapping my grandmother's china set in newspaper, handling each delicate piece with the care of construction workers moving concrete blocks. These dishes had been passed down through 4 generations of Morrison women, and watching strangers manhandle them felt like watching my family history being destroyed in real time. "Please," I begged Derek, hating how weak my voice sounded. "Give me more time to find somewhere else to go. I don't have anywhere to go." Derek's expression didn't soften even slightly. "Not my problem, cousin. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to disrespect our grandfather and live like some kind of party girl." As the movers continued loading my possessions into boxes with brutal efficiency, I realized that Derek had been planning this for months. He knew exactly how to manipulate Grandpa Charles, exactly which lies would resonate with an elderly man from a different generation, exactly how to make me appear irresponsible and ungrateful in comparison to himself. The apartment that had represented my safety, my independence, my hard-won freedom from abuse was being stripped away from me box by box, and I was powerless to stop it. The law office of Martinez and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house downtown, and climbing those steep stairs with my last $400 in my purse felt like ascending to my execution. Sarah Martinez met me in a conference room that smelled of coffee and desperation, her kind eyes taking in my unwashed hair and wrinkled clothes with professional sympathy. "I understand you're facing an emergency eviction situation," she said, gently spreading Derek's documents across the polished wooden table. "Let me review these transfer papers and see what options might be available." I watched her face carefully as she examined each page, hoping to see some flicker of outrage or disbelief that would indicate Derek had made a fatal mistake. Instead, her expression grew increasingly grave as she cross-referenced dates and signatures with a magnifying glass. "I'm afraid the transfer appears legally sound on its face," she said finally. "Your grandfather had the legal right to transfer property he owned, and these documents bear all the required signatures and notarizations." My heart sank into my stomach as I processed her words. But it feels wrong. Derek manipulated him somehow. My grandfather would never do this to me willingly. Sarah nodded sympathetically. "Unfortunately, proving undue influence or mental incapacity requires extensive documentation and expert testimony. Even if we could build such a case, the legal process would take months, and meanwhile, the current property transfer stands." I slumped in my chair, feeling the last threads of hope slipping through my fingers like sand. Outside the window, normal people walked past on the sidewalk, going about their ordinary lives without having their entire world demolished by a single sheet of paper. Then Sarah's expression sharpened as she held one document up to the light. "Wait a moment. Something's not right here." She reached for another magnifying glass and studied the witness signatures with intense focus. "The filing date on this notarization doesn't match the courthouse stamp date." My pulse quickened as she continued examining the papers with the intensity of a detective investigating a murder scene. She pulled out a calendar and began tracing dates with her finger, muttering calculations under her breath. "This is very interesting," she said, looking up at me with the first genuine excitement I'd seen since entering her office. According to the courthouse filing stamp, these documents were processed on a Tuesday, but the notary's certification claims they were witnessed and signed on the previous Friday. That's impossible because this particular notary only works Monday through Wednesday. Hope fluttered in my chest like a trapped bird testing its cage. What does that mean? It means Derek backdated these documents and forged at least 2 witness signatures to avoid the 30-day notification period required for family property transfers. Sarah's voice carried the satisfaction of a prosecutor who had just discovered the smoking gun. This is fraud, Natasha. We can challenge this transfer in court. I wanted to cry with relief, but Sarah held up a cautionary hand. However, Derek has already taken possession of the property and changed the locks. Even with this evidence, emergency court proceedings will take time, and there's no guarantee we can get you back into the apartment quickly. That evening, I sat in my car outside my former home watching Derek and Crystal move furniture through the front door I had painted cheerful yellow just 6 months ago. Crystal looked young and blonde and brittle, the kind of woman who believed men when they promised to take care of everything. Derek directed the furniture placement with the authority of someone who had never doubted his right to take whatever he wanted. The gym membership I'd maintained for 2 years suddenly became my lifeline, providing access to showers and a place to change clothes for work. Fast food restaurants became my dining room, their fluorescent lights harsh against my exhaustion as I counted out exact change for dollar menu items. Dr. Peterson noticed the change in my appearance by the 3rd day. My usually neat ponytail had become bedraggled, my scrubs wrinkled despite my best efforts to steam them in the gym's bathroom sink. "Natasha, is everything all right at home?" he asked during a rare quiet moment between patients. "You seem stressed lately." Pride and shame battled in my throat as I formulated an answer that wouldn't reveal the full extent of my humiliation. "I'm house-sitting for a friend who's out of town, just adjusting to sleeping somewhere different." The lie tasted bitter, but I couldn't bear to see pity in his eyes or risk my job by admitting I was essentially homeless. Dr. Peterson had built his practice on reliability and professionalism, and I couldn't afford to appear unstable or distracted. Sarah called me every few days with updates that felt like emotional roller coasters. The forgery evidence was strong, but Derek's lawyer had filed counter motions claiming the notary made an innocent mistake. The courthouse was backed up with cases pushing our hearing date further into an uncertain future. Meanwhile, my savings dwindled with terrifying speed. Legal fees, gym membership renewals, fast food meals, and gas for my car consumed every dollar I earned. At night, parked in various well-lit parking lots around town, I calculated and recalculated my remaining resources like a general planning a doomed battle. Derek had posted pictures on social media of himself and Crystal, christening their new home with champagne and takeout Chinese food. They used my grandmother's china plates as casual dinnerware, and seeing those precious pieces reduced to everyday objects felt like watching someone use family heirlooms as paperweights. The stress began affecting my work performance despite my best efforts to compartmentalize. I mixed up patient files, forgot to order supplies, and nearly double-booked Dr. Peterson's Friday afternoon appointments. Each mistake felt like another step toward losing the one stable thing left in my crumbling life. "The court date is set for 6 weeks from now," Sarah informed me during our latest consultation. "But Natasha, I need to be honest with you about something. Even if we win, proving fraud doesn't automatically restore your housing. Derek could claim he acted in good faith based on what he believed were legitimate documents." 6 weeks. I looked at my bank account balance and did the math. Even eating nothing but ramen noodles and sleeping in my car every night, I would be completely broke in 3 weeks. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I understood for the first time that legal vindication might come too late to save me from complete financial collapse. Derek had played this game before, and he was winning. Sunset Manor smelled like industrial disinfectant and overcooked vegetables, but I had always associated those scents with comfort because they meant time with Grandpa Charles. Now walking down the familiar beige hallways toward his room, I felt like I was approaching the scene of a crime. I found him sitting in his recliner by the window, staring out at the parking lot with vacant eyes. He looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, as if Derek's betrayal had somehow physically diminished him. "Grandpa," I said softly, settling into the visitor chair beside him, "it's Natasha." He turned toward me with a confused smile. "Natasha, is it Sunday already? I thought it was Tuesday, or maybe Wednesday. The days all look the same in here." My heart clenched at the uncertainty in his voice. Grandpa Charles had always been sharp as a tack, able to remember dates and details with the precision of a calendar. Seeing him struggling with basic temporal awareness felt like watching a master craftsman suddenly unable to hold his tools properly. "I wanted to talk to you about the apartment," I said gently, "about the papers you signed giving it to Derek." His expression grew even more confused, and he rubbed his forehead as if trying to massage away fog from his thoughts. "Derek comes to visit me a lot. He's a good boy, brings me cookies from the vending machine and tells me about his life. Did you know he's getting married again?" "Grandpa Derek isn't getting married. He has a girlfriend named Crystal, but they just started dating." I kept my voice patient and calm despite the frustration building in my chest. "Do you remember signing papers about my apartment?" Charles stared at me blankly for several long moments. "Papers? Derek brings me lots of papers to sign. Birthday cards for his children, mostly. He says I'm getting forgetful and might miss their birthdays if I don't sign them early." A chill ran down my spine. Grandpa Derek doesn't have any children. Before Charles could respond, Jennifer Walsh, his primary care nurse, appeared in the doorway. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen every possible family dynamic play out in institutional settings. "Natasha, I'm so glad to see you," Jennifer said, though her expression carried concern rather than pleasure. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" We stepped into the hallway and Jennifer's professional mask slipped to reveal genuine worry. "I've been caring for your grandfather for 2 years, and I've noticed some changes recently. Memory gaps, confusion about time, and people increased susceptibility to suggestion. Are you saying he might have dementia?" Jennifer glanced around to ensure we wouldn't be overheard. "I'm not qualified to make that diagnosis, but I've seen the signs before. Your grandfather has been asking about conversations that never happened and mentioning people who don't exist. Last week, he told me he had dinner with his sister Margaret. Margaret died 15 years ago." The hallway seemed to tilt around me as I processed this information. "Has anyone else noticed these changes?" "That's what worries me," Jennifer said quietly. "His nephew Derek has been very involved in his care lately, almost too involved. He's been asking detailed questions about Charles's medication schedule and has requested permission to handle his financial affairs." I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss of manipulation and elder abuse. What kind of questions about his medication? Jennifer hesitated, clearly weighing professional discretion against genuine concern for her patient. Derek wanted to know which medications affect memory and awareness. He claimed he was worried about Charles becoming dependent on them. "Can I see Grandpa's medication records?" "You're not listed as his healthcare proxy," Jennifer said apologetically, "but Derek is. He was added to all Charles's paperwork 6 months ago." The pieces of Derek's plan were falling into place like tumblers in a lock. He had systematically positioned himself as Charles's primary caretaker and decision-maker, while simultaneously isolating him from other family members and manipulating his mental clarity. Back in Charles's room, I sat down beside him again and took his weathered hands in mine. "Grandpa, I need you to try to remember. Did Derek ever bring you papers about my apartment? Papers that said you were giving him the place where I live?" Charles's eyes grew cloudy and he squeezed my hands with surprising strength. "I don't remember signing anything like that, sweetheart. I would never take your home away from you. That apartment means everything to you after what that terrible boyfriend did." Relief flooded through me so suddenly I felt dizzy. "Then you didn't mean to transfer ownership to Derek?" "Transfer ownership." Charles looked genuinely alarmed. "Natasha, that apartment is supposed to be yours someday. It's in my will. I would never give it to Derek while you need it." I pulled out my phone and showed him photos of the signed documents. Charles studied them with growing distress, his hands shaking as he traced his own signature with one finger. "I don't remember this," he whispered. But that's my signature. How can it be my signature if I don't remember signing it? The conversation was interrupted by a cheerful voice from the doorway. Well, look who's here, my favorite cousin slumming it with the elderly. Derek stood in the entrance to Charles's room holding a box of expensive chocolates and wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He moved with the confidence of someone who owned every space he entered, settling into the chair across from me as if he belonged there more than I did. Derek. Charles brightened immediately, his confusion clearing like fog burned away by sunlight. You brought chocolates again. You spoil an old man. Only the best for my favorite grandfather, Derek said smoothly, though I noticed he avoided making eye contact with me. I hope Natasha isn't upsetting you with wild stories about paperwork. You know how emotional women can get about change. I watched in horrified fascination as Derek worked his manipulation in real time. His voice carried just the right blend of affection and condescension, treating Charles like a beloved child who might believe silly stories if not properly guided by a responsible adult. Natasha says I signed papers giving you her apartment, Charles said uncertainly, but I don't remember doing that. Derek's expression became a masterpiece of concerned sympathy. Grandpa, we talked about this last week. Remember, you were worried about Natasha living alone and not taking proper care of herself. You said a young woman needs family guidance, and since I'm getting married soon, Crystal and I could provide a stable influence. I wanted to scream that Derek wasn't getting married, that Crystal was barely more than a stranger, that every word coming out of his mouth was a carefully crafted lie. But I could see Charles's confusion returning as he tried to reconcile Derek's confident assertions with his own fractured memory. I just want what's best for everyone, Charles said weakly. Families should stick together and help each other. Derek nodded sagely. Exactly. And that's why you made the wise decision to transfer the apartment to me. Natasha will understand eventually that this is all for her own good. Later, after Derek left with promises to return the next day, I sat with Charles in increasingly heavy silence. The medication records Jennifer had shown me painted a disturbing picture of inconsistent dosing and frequent schedule changes, all approved by Derek in his role as healthcare proxy. Charles's bank statements told an even more troubling story. Automatic withdrawals of $500 every week for the past 4 months, all authorized by Derek for miscellaneous care expenses. The money had funded Derek's luxury purchases, while Charles continued eating cafeteria food and wearing clothes that had seen better days 2 decades ago. Grandpa, I said carefully, do you remember giving Derek permission to take money from your accounts? Charles looked at me with the haunted expression of someone who could no longer trust his own mind. I don't remember much of anything anymore, sweetheart. Derek handles all my business affairs now. He says it's too complicated for an old man to manage alone. As I drove away from Sunset Manor that evening, I understood that Derek hadn't just stolen my apartment. He had stolen my grandfather's dignity, his autonomy, and his peace of mind. The scope of his cruelty was breathtaking in its calculated precision. But understanding the depth of Derek's crimes didn't solve my immediate problem. Even if I could prove elder abuse, even if I could expose every lie Derek had told and every document he had forged, Charles was still legally incompetent to reverse the property transfer. I was still homeless, still running out of money, and still fighting a battle where Derek held all the tactical advantages. The feeling of helplessness was suffocating, but underneath it, something else was beginning to grow, something harder and more dangerous than despair. Anger. The dental office was unusually quiet on Tuesday afternoon when Crystal Walker appeared in our waiting room, like an apparition materialized from my worst nightmares. She looked nervous and jumpy, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that emphasized the dark circles under her eyes and the way she kept glancing toward the parking lot as if expecting someone to follow her inside. I need to speak with you, she said quietly when I approached the reception desk. It's about Derek and your grandfather and things you need to know. My first instinct was suspicion. Crystal was Derek's girlfriend, his accomplice in stealing my home, the woman who had been sleeping in my bed and using my grandmother's dishes like they were disposable party supplies. but something in her expression stopped me from sending her away immediately. "We're closing in 20 minutes, I said carefully. "Dr. Peterson is finishing up with his last patient." Crystal nodded rapidly, her hands trembling as she clutched a manila envelope against her chest. "I'll wait. This can't wait much longer." I finished my closing duties with mechanical efficiency, while keeping one eye on Crystal, who sat rigidly in the waiting room chair, like someone expecting an explosion. When Dr. Peterson left through the back exit and I locked the front door behind the last patient, Crystal finally relaxed enough to speak. "Derek is going to kill me if he finds out I'm here," she said without preamble, "but I can't live with what he's doing anymore. What he did to you, what he's planning to do to other people." "What other people?" I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. Crystal opened the envelope with shaking hands and spread its contents across the reception desk. Photographs, printed emails, handwritten notes, and what looked like architectural surveys. "Derek has been researching your great-aunt Helen's farm property outside Millerville. He's planning the same scam he pulled on your grandfather." I stared at the documents in growing horror. Derek had aerial photographs of Aunt Helen's 300-acre farm property tax records and detailed notes about her financial situation and family relationships. His handwriting covered sticky notes attached to each document. Isolated no close family nearby. Property value estimated at $2.1 million. Trusts no one since husband's death. "How did you get these?" I whispered. Crystal's voice was barely audible. "Derek doesn't know I can read his computer password. He's not as careful as he thinks he is. But there's more. Much worse." She pulled out a manila folder labeled Background Research in Derek's neat handwriting. Inside were police reports, court documents, and newspaper clippings from 3 different states. The photos showed the same man, but with different names: Derek Thompson, Daniel Marcus, Daniel David Thompson. "Derek isn't who he says he is," Crystal said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "His real name is Daniel Marcus Kowalski, and he's wanted for elder fraud in Illinois and Arizona. He changes his name and moves every few years after he's stolen everything he can from elderly victims." My hands shook as I read the police reports. Multiple victims, all elderly and isolated, all manipulated into signing over property and financial assets before Derek disappeared with their life savings. The amounts were staggering: $400,000 from a retired teacher in Chicago, $600,000 from a widowed farmer in Phoenix, over $1 million from a nursing home resident in Tucson. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "You've been living in my apartment enjoying the profits from his crimes." Crystal's composure finally cracked and tears began streaming down her face. "Because I thought I was helping someone I loved start over after a difficult divorce. I thought the apartment transfer was a legitimate family arrangement. I didn't know about the forged documents or the elder abuse or the other victims until last week." She showed me photos of bruises on her upper arms, clearly finger-shaped and recent. "Derek doesn't handle questions well. When I started asking about inconsistencies in his stories, he made it clear that I needed to stop being curious about his business affairs." The final envelope contained the most damning evidence yet recorded conversations between Derek and an unknown associate discussing their elderly client portfolio and strategies for accelerating asset liquidation. Derek's voice was calm and professional as he described drugging Charles's medication to ensure compliance and isolating him from family members who might interfere. "He's been putting extra sedatives in your grandfather's evening medication," Crystal said quietly. "That's why Charles has been so confused and compliant. Derek has a contact at the pharmacy who's been providing unmarked pills." The casual cruelty of it made me feel physically sick. Derek hadn't just stolen from Charles, he had systematically destroyed his mental capacity to ensure he couldn't fight back or seek help. "There's something else," Crystal continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Derek has been researching you too. Your work schedule, your finances, your relationship history. He knows about your abusive ex-boyfriend and how hard you worked to rebuild your life. He planned this whole thing to specifically target your vulnerabilities." She showed me printed screenshots of my social media profiles, my LinkedIn account, even my gym membership information. Derek had studied my life like a general planning a military campaign, identifying every weakness and pressure point he could exploit. He said you were the perfect victim because you're isolated and unlikely to fight back effectively. He thought your history with domestic abuse would make you passive and easy to manipulate. Rage built in my chest like a wildfire, burning away the helplessness and despair that had consumed me for weeks. Derek had underestimated me catastrophically. I wasn't the broken victim he thought he was targeting. I was a survivor who had already fought one battle for my independence and won. "What do you want from me?" I asked Crystal. "Help," she said simply. "Derek is planning to disappear as soon as he sells your apartment and finalizes the theft of your grandfather's assets. He's already got buyer lined up, someone who doesn't ask questions about rapid property transfers. Once that sale goes through, he'll vanish and your grandfather will never see a penny of his stolen money." Crystal pulled out one final document, a plane ticket confirmation in Derek's real name, Daniel Marcus Kowalski, departing for Mexico in 6 weeks. He's been planning his exit strategy from the beginning, and he's threatened to hurt my family if I don't help him disappear cleanly. I studied Crystal's frightened face and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff into free fall. Derek had spent months planning his assault on my family and my life. It was time to plan a counterattack. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Crystal managed a weak smile. "Derek thinks he's the only one who knows how to play dirty. He's about to learn that he picked the wrong family to mess with." For the first time in weeks, I felt something besides fear and desperation. I felt dangerous. The FBI field office in downtown occupied an entire floor of a granite government building that looked like it had been designed to intimidate criminals into confession before they even reached the interrogation rooms. Agent Lisa Rodriguez met me and Crystal in a sterile conference room that smelled like coffee and institutional cleaning supplies, her sharp eyes taking in our nervous energy with professional assessment. "I understand you have information about interstate elder fraud," she said, settling into her chair with the efficiency of someone who had heard every possible sob story and learned to separate genuine cases from attention-seeking dramatics. Crystal opened her carefully organized evidence folders while I tried to project competence, despite feeling like I was drowning in circumstances beyond my comprehension. Agent Rodriguez examined each document with methodical precision, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting additional details about dates and locations. "This individual appears to be Daniel Marcus Kowalski, who's been on our watch list for 18 months. She said finally, her tone sharpening with genuine interest. "We've been tracking his movement across state lines, but he's been careful to avoid creating evidence trails that would support federal charges." She pulled out a thick file folder labeled Operation Golden Years and spread photographs across the table. Derek's face appeared in various driver's license photos and surveillance images, each showing him with slightly different appearances, but unmistakably the same person. Kowalski is part of a larger criminal network that specializes in elderly financial exploitation, Agent Rodriguez explained. They target isolated seniors with valuable assets, typically using family connections or romantic relationships to gain access and trust. The operation is sophisticated, involving corrupt notaries, complicit medical professionals, and document forgers. I felt simultaneously vindicated and terrified as she described Derek's criminal enterprise. My situation wasn't an isolated family dispute. It was part of a systematic predatory operation that had been destroying lives across multiple states. The challenge with elder fraud cases is proving intent and establishing federal jurisdiction. Agent Rodriguez continued. Kowalski has been careful to structure his crimes as civil family disputes rather than criminal fraud. But if we can demonstrate interstate conspiracy and pattern of criminal behavior, we can bring federal charges. Crystal provided copies of the recorded conversations, Derek's travel documents, and evidence of his false identity use. Agent Rodriguez's expression grew increasingly serious as she reviewed each piece of evidence. "This is exactly what we need to build a federal case," she said with satisfaction. "The recorded discussions of drugging victims and the coordination with associates in multiple states establish the conspiracy elements we require." However, Agent Rodriguez also delivered sobering news about the immediate timeline. Building a federal case takes time and will need additional evidence to ensure successful prosecution. Meanwhile, Kowalski will likely accelerate his timeline if he suspects investigation. Crystal and I exchanged glances, both thinking of Derek's planned departure date just weeks away. If he disappeared to Mexico with the proceeds from selling my apartment and stealing Charles's assets, he might never be brought to justice. "There might be a way to expedite the process," Agent Rodriguez said thoughtfully. "If we can catch Kowalski in the act of interstate crimes or conspiracy activities, we can make immediate arrests and freeze his assets pending investigation." That evening, I sat in my car outside Sunset Manor watching Derek's familiar figure enter the building for his nightly visit with Charles. According to Crystal, these visits had become Derek's opportunity to adjust Charles's medication and extract additional financial authorizations while his mind was compromised. My phone buzzed with a text from Crystal. "He's planning to have Charles sign papers tomorrow authorizing sale of apartment. Says it's just routine financial management. This might be our best chance to catch him manipulating a vulnerable adult." Dr. Peterson had noticed my distraction at work and finally cornered me during lunch break. "Natasha, you've been stressed for weeks and it's affecting your performance. As your employer and someone who cares about you, I need to know what's going on." The kindness in his voice broke down the last of my pride, and I found myself explaining everything. Derek's fraud, my homelessness, the FBI investigation, and my desperate plan to catch a career criminal before he disappeared forever. Dr. Peterson listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting me unburden months of accumulated fear and anger. When I finished, he was quiet for several long moments. "How can I help?" he said simply. "I don't want to involve you in something dangerous," I protested, but Dr. Peterson held up a hand to stop my objections. "Natasha, you've worked for me for 3 years. You're reliable, honest, and one of the most resilient people I've ever met. If you're asking for help, then you genuinely need it, and I'm not going to abandon you when you're fighting for your life." He offered me the spare room above the dental practice as temporary housing, eliminating my most immediate source of stress and giving me a stable base of operations for the investigation. More importantly, he provided something I hadn't realized. I was desperate for an adult ally who believed me and was willing to help without asking for anything in return. Meanwhile, Agent Rodriguez worked with federal prosecutors to prepare emergency asset seizure warrants that could be executed the moment Derek committed provable federal crimes. The legal machinery was complex and moved slowly, but it was moving in the right direction. Crystal's role became increasingly dangerous as Derek grew suspicious of her behavior. He had begun monitoring her phone calls and questioning her whereabouts, forcing her to meet with me and Agent Rodriguez in elaborate secrecy to avoid detection. "He's definitely planning something big," she reported during one clandestine meeting in a grocery store parking lot. "He's been making arrangements to liquidate assets quickly, and he's been researching offshore banking procedures. Plus, he's been asking me about my passport and whether I'd be interested in traveling internationally." The timeline was accelerating beyond our control. Derek's planned apartment sale was scheduled for the following week, and he had arranged for Charles to sign additional financial authorizations that would give him access to retirement accounts worth over $400,000. "We need to catch him in the act," Agent Rodriguez said grimly. "Once he completes these final thefts and leaves the country, extradition becomes extremely complicated." Crystal agreed to wear a recording device during Derek's next visit to Charles, hoping to capture evidence of medication tampering and financial coercion that would support immediate federal charges. As I lay in the small but clean room above Dr. Peterson's practice, I realized that Derek's greatest mistake had been underestimating my capacity for strategic thinking. He had seen a vulnerable woman with a history of abuse and assumed I would collapse under pressure. Instead, I had built a coalition of allies and gathered evidence that would destroy not just his immediate plans, but his entire criminal enterprise. The FBI was closing in, Crystal was providing inside information, and Dr. Peterson was ensuring I had the stability necessary to see this fight through to its conclusion. Derek thought he was playing chess against someone who didn't even know the rules. He was about to discover that I had been planning several moves ahead of him from the moment I decided to fight back. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The phone call came at 2 a.m, Crystal's voice tight with panic cutting through my exhausted sleep like a fire alarm. Derek knows about the investigation. He found the recording device and he's going crazy. He's forcing me to drive him to the Canadian border right now. I sat up in bed, immediately alert despite the hour. Through the window of my temporary room above the dental practice street lights cast long shadows across the empty parking lot. "Where are you?" "Gas station on Highway 12, about 20 minutes outside town. He's inside buying energy drinks and road food. Natasha, he has a gun now. He showed it to me when he found the wire. Said if I try to run or signal anyone, he'll hurt my sister and her kids." My blood turned to ice water. Crystal's sister lived in Denver with 2 children under the age of 10, and Derek's network of criminal associates made his threats credible and immediate. "I already called Agent Rodriguez," I said, reaching for the clothes I had laid out the night before. "Are you wearing the backup recording device?" "Yes, but Derek is watching me constantly. He made me throw my regular phone out the car window 30 miles back and gave me this burner phone to use only for essential communication." Agent Rodriguez had prepared us for this possibility. Derek was too experienced to go down easily, and cornered predators often became violently desperate. The backup plan involved Crystal leading Derek into a controlled situation where federal agents could arrest him safely while protecting potential hostages. "Remember the plan?" I said, pulling on my shoes while balancing the phone against my shoulder. "Lead him toward the truck stop at the intersection of Highway 12 and County Road 47. Agent Rodriguez will have teams positioned there." "He's coming back to the car," Crystal whispered urgently. "If something happens to me, make sure everyone knows what he really is." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the darkness of my temporary refuge. Outside, Agent Rodriguez's unmarked sedan pulled into the parking lot with its headlights off a silent signal that federal law enforcement was mobilizing for Derek's capture. I climbed into the passenger seat, noting the tension in Agent Rodriguez's jaw and the way her hand rested near her service weapon. "All units are in position," she said, pulling onto the highway with controlled urgency. "We've got surveillance teams tracking Derek's vehicle, and local law enforcement is coordinating with us to ensure civilian safety." The truck stop appeared ahead like an island of fluorescent light in the pre-dawn darkness. Long-haul truckers moved between their rigs and the building with the unhurried efficiency of people accustomed to working while the rest of the world slept. Agent Rodriguez positioned our car behind a row of tractor trailers, giving us clear sight lines while maintaining tactical concealment. Derek's stolen Honda Civic appeared 15 minutes later, moving erratically, as if the driver was fighting fatigue or anxiety. Through binoculars, I could see Crystal in the passenger seat, her posture rigid with fear, while Derek gestured emphatically with one hand while steering with the other. "He's agitated," Agent Rodriguez observed, speaking quietly into her radio headset. "Target appears to be under significant stress. All units maintain position until he exits the vehicle." Derek parked near the building's side entrance, away from the main parking area where most of the truckers had gathered. He climbed out of the car slowly, his eyes scanning the area with the paranoid alertness of someone who knew pursuit was imminent. Crystal remained in the passenger seat, probably following his instructions to stay put while he assessed the situation. "We need him away from the civilian vehicle before we move," Agent Rodriguez said into her radio. "If he panics and tries to use the girlfriend as a human shield, this becomes much more complicated." Derek disappeared into the truck stop building, leaving Crystal alone in the car. Agent Rodriguez signaled to concealed team members who began moving into position around the building's exits. The trap was closing, but carefully, methodically, with the patience of professionals who understood that rushing could turn an arrest into a tragedy. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Derek is meeting someone inside. Older man with briefcase. They're discussing travel documents and money transfers. Crystal was still recording, still gathering evidence, even while being held essentially hostage by an increasingly unstable criminal. Her courage humbled me and reinforced my determination to see Derek brought to justice for every victim he had destroyed over the years. "We've identified the contact," Agent Rodriguez said, listening to reports from surveillance teams inside the building. "Marcus Chen, a document forger we've been tracking in connection with the larger fraud ring. This is exactly what we need to make federal conspiracy charges stick." Derek emerged from the building 25 minutes later carrying a manila envelope and moving with renewed confidence. He had obtained whatever assistance he needed for his planned escape, and his body language suggested he believed he was still ahead of law enforcement efforts. He was wrong. As Derek approached his car, federal agents emerged from concealment positions like pieces of a perfectly choreographed trap snapping shut. "Federal agent, stop where you are and place your hands above your head." Derek's response was immediate and violent. Instead of surrendering, he lunged toward the car where Crystal waited, screaming threats about killing hostages and fighting his way to freedom. Agent Rodriguez and her team moved with trained precision, cutting off his escape routes while maintaining clear fields of fire that wouldn't endanger innocent bystanders. "Derek Allen Thompson, also known as Daniel Marcus Kowalski, you're under arrest for interstate elder fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes against vulnerable adults," Agent Rodriguez announced as backup agents secured the scene. Derek's capture was not the dramatic shootout I had feared, but rather the methodical arrest of a career criminal who finally ran out of places to hide. As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he screamed accusations at Crystal, claiming she had manipulated him into criminal behavior and that he was the real victim of a vindictive ex-girlfriend's revenge scheme. The lies sounded pathetic and desperate coming from a man surrounded by evidence of his systematic predation of elderly victims. Crystal climbed out of the car on shaking legs, immediately surrounded by victim advocates who began the process of ensuring her safety and securing her testimony for the upcoming federal prosecution. We recovered forged travel documents, over $40,000 in cash, and detailed records of planned asset transfers. Agent Rodriguez informed me as the scene was processed by federal crime scene technicians. Plus, the recording equipment captured clear evidence of Derek threatening violence against witnesses and discussing his criminal operation with known associates. As dawn broke over the truck stop parking lot, I watched Derek being loaded into a federal transport vehicle for the beginning of what would likely be a very long journey through the criminal justice system. His criminal empire was collapsing around him, built as it was on lies and the exploitation of people who trusted him. But the victory felt incomplete. Derek was in custody, but Charles was still suffering from the effects of deliberate medication tampering. My apartment was still tied up in legal proceedings, and the larger criminal network Derek had worked with remained largely intact. Justice was coming, but slowly and with a complexity that reminded me why most predators like Derek operated with impunity for years before being caught. The real test would be whether the federal prosecution could build a case strong enough to ensure Derek never again had the opportunity to destroy another family's life. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse lobby reading the newspaper headline that declared, "Elder Fraud Ring Dismantled, 15-year Sentences Handed Down." Derek's federal trial had been swift and decisive, with overwhelming evidence leading to convictions on 17 counts of interstate elder fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to exploit vulnerable adults. The federal prosecutor had built an airtight case, using Crystal's recorded conversations, the forged documents, Derek's criminal history, under multiple identities and testimony from 11 victims across 5 states. Derek's network of corrupt notaries, medical professionals, and document forgers had been systematically arrested and prosecuted, effectively destroying an operation that had stolen millions of dollars from elderly Americans. Derek received 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole plus restitution orders that would keep him financially accountable to his victims for the rest of his life. His appeals were quickly denied, and he was transferred to a maximum security facility in Arizona, as far from his victims as the federal prison system could manage. My apartment ownership had been restored through emergency federal asset recovery proceedings, with all of Derek's fraudulent transfers declared legally void. The relief of walking back into my own space, seeing my grandmother's china back in its proper place, and sleeping in my own bed again was indescribable. More than recovering my home, I had reclaimed my sense of safety and self-determination. Grandpa Charles had made remarkable progress once Derek's medication interference ended and proper medical care resumed. The sedatives Derek had been secretly administering were removed from his system, and his natural mental clarity began returning gradually. While some memory issues remained due to his age, the confusion and vulnerability that Derek had exploited were largely resolved. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," Charles said during one of our weekly visits, his eyes clear and focused in a way they hadn't been for months. "I should have known something was wrong when I couldn't remember signing those papers. I should have trusted my instincts instead of letting Derek convince me I was losing my mind." "Grandpa, you were being deliberately drugged and manipulated by a career criminal," I reassured him, holding his steady hands in mine. "You're not responsible for being victimized by someone who spent years perfecting techniques for exploiting elderly people." Charles had become an advocate for elder abuse prevention, working with Sunset Manor to implement better safeguards against financial exploitation and family manipulation. His story was featured in training materials for healthcare workers, helping them recognize signs of abuse they might have previously dismissed as normal aging or family dynamics. Crystal had entered witness protection temporarily while testifying against Derek and his associates, but she emerged from the program stronger and more confident than before. She relocated to a different state with assistance from victim services programs, pursuing education in social work with a focus on helping other domestic abuse survivors recognize and escape manipulative relationships. Derek taught me that love should never require you to participate in hurting other people. She told me during one of our periodic phone calls, "Real love protects you and empowers you to become your best self, not someone who enables cruelty." Dr. Peterson had offered me a promotion to office manager, recognizing the organizational skills and resilience I had demonstrated throughout the crisis. More importantly, he had become a mentor who helped me understand that asking for help was a sign of strength rather than weakness. "You handled an impossible situation with grace and strategic thinking," he said during my performance review. "You built a coalition of allies, gathered evidence systematically, and never gave up even when circumstances seemed hopeless. Those are leadership qualities that will serve you well throughout your career." The experience had transformed my relationship with vulnerability and independence. I had learned that true strength came not from never needing help, but from being wise enough to accept assistance when it was offered and brave enough to ask for it when it wasn't. The isolation that had made me an attractive target for Derek's manipulation was replaced by a network of genuine relationships built on mutual respect and support. I began volunteering with elder abuse prevention organizations, sharing my family's story to help other people recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation. Many families face similar situations where trusted relatives gradually assumed control of elderly members' finances and decision-making, often with devastating consequences that went undetected until irreversible damage was done. The most important thing to understand about predators like Derek is that they're patient and systematic. I would tell audiences during prevention workshops, they don't steal everything at once. They build trust, slowly isolate their victims gradually, and create dependency relationships that make resistance seem impossible. My apartment had been renovated and redecorated, transformed from a space that represented survival into one that celebrated renewal and growth. The walls held photographs of my expanded chosen family, Dr. Peterson and his staff, Agent Rodriguez, and some of her colleagues, Grandpa Charles during his recovery, and even a few pictures of Crystal from before Derek's abuse, changed her life. The legal proceedings had recovered most of Charles's stolen assets, allowing him to live comfortably and independently while receiving appropriate medical care. More importantly, the federal investigation had exposed systemic problems in elder care oversight that led to policy changes protecting other vulnerable adults from similar exploitation. On quiet evenings, I would sit by my window watching the sunset, paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, reflecting on how close I had come to losing everything that mattered to me. Derek's manipulation had nearly destroyed my housing, my financial stability, my relationship with my grandfather, and my faith in my ability to protect myself from predatory people. But surviving his attack had also revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. I had learned to think strategically under pressure, to build alliances with people who shared my values, and to fight for justice even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Most importantly, I had discovered that healing from trauma didn't require forgetting the past, but rather integrating those experiences into a stronger, more resilient sense of self. The apartment that had once represented my escape from an abusive relationship had become something even more valuable, the foundation for a life built on genuine connections, meaningful work, and the confidence that I could handle whatever challenges the future might bring. Derek had tried to reduce me to a victim, someone whose past trauma made her easy to exploit and manipulate. Instead, he had forced me to become someone who could recognize manipulation, gather allies, and fight effectively for myself and others who face similar predation. The greatest victory wasn't getting my apartment back or seeing Derek imprisoned, though both of those outcomes brought deep satisfaction. The greatest victory was understanding that my worth wasn't determined by what other people tried to take from me, but by how I chose to respond when my values and well-being were threatened. I had learned that justice requires patient strategy and the courage to keep fighting even when victory seems impossible. Most importantly, I had learned that healing happens not in isolation, but in community with other people who understand that everyone deserves safety, dignity, and the chance to build a life based on their own choices rather than someone else's manipulation. As I finished writing thank you cards to everyone who had helped during the crisis, I realized that Derek's attempt to destroy my life had inadvertently taught me how to build one that was stronger, more connected, and more meaningful than anything I had imagined possible. The apartment was still my sanctuary, but now it was also a reminder that home isn't just a place where you're safe from the world. It's a place where you can rest and recover so that you're strong enough to make the world a little safer for everyone else. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone you trusted completely betrayed that trust? How did you find the strength to fight back when everything seemed stacked against you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to hear more stories about finding strength in impossible circumstances. Sharing these experiences helps create a community where we can all learn from each other's courage and resilience. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember that no matter how dark things might seem, there are always people willing to help if you're brave enough to ask for it.